Scandinavia closes this era with guarded gates and regulated passage, where kingdoms replace the fluid discretion of coastal clans. Geography shapes the transition. Fjords function as chokepoints, and maps evolve from descriptions of space into instruments of control. Power stabilizes through measurement. Silver is weighed, recorded, and redistributed, converting episodic violence into predictable revenue. Fragmented territories compress into defined borders, while trade routes thicken wherever tribute can be extracted with consistency. The fjord becomes a corridor of discipline, leaving a final uncertainty. Did unification create strength, or quietly narrow local autonomy?
Settlements cling to fjords without a center. Authority remains local, and coordination rarely survives the shoreline's distance. Exchange relies on barter and personal trust because no institution guarantees value beyond the next inlet. Disputes do not truly end. Power sits inside a hall, enforced through proximity, loyalty, and the credible threat of force. Hierarchy is physical and visible. Coerced labor sustains households, while freedom is unevenly distributed across the same cold ground. The coastline fractures rule into isolated pockets, and the sea becomes the only corridor capable of linking them. Fjords deepen fragmentation, isolating communities and making collective enforcement costly, slow, and uncertain. Blood vengeance operates like accounting. A blade is wiped clean, yet the debt remains active rather than resolved. The Thing negotiates settlements, but enforcement stays personal, and retaliation lingers behind every fragile consensus. Stability struggles to scale. Records exist, yet they remain local, inconsistent, and incapable of extending authority outward. Mobility replaces surplus. Ships are prepared because departure is often easier than restructuring land. Geography divides coordination into branching inlets, raising the cost of unity with every additional separation. Thin soil and short seasons limit growth, pressuring elites to seek wealth beyond the constraints of their own fields. Feuds persist because negotiation unfolds under threat, and violence remains cheaper than building durable institutions. Sea lanes connect what land cannot, allowing movement to expand faster than governance can adapt. The empty horizon remains unresolved, leaving a final question suspended. Was chaos cultural or economically unavoidable?
Inheritance steadily fractures land into smaller claims, and each generation multiplies boundaries faster than surplus can recover. Population pressure intensifies along the same cold shoreline, turning scarcity into a constant political constraint. Settlements expand across the map, while arable strips remain narrow, forcing increasingly difficult calculations about survival. Tension does not begin with battle. It begins when grain stores thin out and shortages accumulate quietly. The coast offers little relief. Salt, rock, and weather limit expansion long before ambition does. The longship alters the equation, transforming distance into opportunity and making outward movement cheaper than internal reform. Foreign silver flows inward in sudden surges, teaching elites how portable wealth can reorganize loyalty structures. Violence adapts accordingly. Weapons sit beside silver, ensuring that force can be translated directly into value. Sea routes stretch toward richer coasts, yet fortified river mouths gradually raise the cost of entry. Defensive infrastructure spreads without spectacle, quietly increasing the risks of extraction while offering no partnership. Across the water, England's internal order hardens, presenting both a warning and a structural example. Silver accumulates rapidly and disappears just as quickly, revealing the volatility beneath apparent prosperity. Elite cooperation remains fragile, Negotiations over routes and shares can collapse within a single meeting. Trade routes converge on Baltic hubs, concentrating exchange where surveillance and oversight become easier. Markets expand under watchful eyes, and control begins precisely where goods are required to pass. Hedeby occupies a junction where geography compresses movement, granting leverage to whoever governs access. Inspection routines normalize extraction. Goods are delayed, assessed, and lightly taxed without dramatic declarations. Compliance grows through repetition as tally marks standardize obligations and convert habit into authority. Fjord mouths function as gates, slowing ships until payment quietly transforms passage into permission. Control remains minimal yet decisive. Even a rope barrier can convert a corridor into steady revenue. Allegiance becomes transactional, secured through sealed bundles rather than myth, and loyalty acquires a measurable price. Gradually, opportunistic raids give way to stable tribute corridors where risk can be calculated and managed. Concentrated storage attracts guardianship, and guardianship evolves into structured authority over accumulated goods. When extraction falters, sites empty and decay, leaving the landscape as a record of systemic instability. The pouch tightens closed, marking the shift from seizing wealth outright to charging for controlled access.
Western Norway appears as a lattice of fjords and rival nodes, where consolidation first takes shape as lines on water rather than crowns on heads. Strategy replaces legend. Alliances are gathered deliberately, treated as temporary instruments rather than bonds of loyalty. Coalitions endure because tokens and silver act as guarantees, translating allegiance into measurable obligation. Coastal powers narrow into a single corridor, and coordination gradually proves more effective than scattered autonomy. Centralization reveals itself through logistics, longships assembled together, bundles standardized, movement planned without spectacle. Tally marks convert supplies into obligations, and obligations into reliable enforcement capacity. Fjord mouths evolve into gates, allowing geography itself to generate steady streams of revenue. Tribute flows without drama. A rope barrier and watchpost regulate passage more efficiently than open confrontation. Seals and marked goods render collection traceable, shrinking the space where refusal can survive unnoticed. Compliance emerges under calibrated pressure as negotiation unfolds within sight of restrained coercion. Raid routes lose relevance, replaced by stable corridors engineered for predictable extraction. Unification manifests as systematic asset seizure. Confiscated weapons and silver are sorted like inventory, not celebrated as trophies. Displacement follows quietly, with families departing under supervision, revealing consolidation's human cost without spectacle. Scarce farmland consolidates into larger estates, transforming land into a controllable economic asset. Rewards function as assignments. Estate tokens bind loyal elites to the center through structured dependency. Discipline becomes visible in synchronized rowing, where coordinated motion signals a scalable command structure. Patrol loops replace episodic raids, marking the transition from sudden violence to continuous oversight. Continued public assemblies occur, yet resistance surfaces within them, reminding that consolidation always generates counterpressure. Rebellion often begins in restraint, hands tighten around an axe haft, then release as confrontation is deferred. On the map, loyal nodes intensify, while independent elites recede, turning power into a spatial pattern. An empty fjord suggests surveillance has succeeded. Silence reflects enforcement rather than harmony. Tribute packages become standardized units, enabling authority to expand without constant recourse to force.
Administrative compartments reshape thinking itself, training officials to categorize obligations beyond kinship ties. A coherent coastal block stabilizes into a governable form, reducing complexity into manageable structure. Land is cleared and fenced, making agricultural production visible and legible to centralized oversight. Keys and seals displace speeches, and authentication becomes the understated language of rule. Maritime captains receive payment and obligation together, professionalizing force around a shared ledger. Control advances gate by gate, converting movement into permission and permission into recurring revenue. Unity remains uneasy. Whispers gather at night as dissatisfied elites probe for weakness. The deeper question persists. Did kings generate order or simply concentrate violence within paperwork and seals?
Hofsfjord first appears as geometry on parchment, where rival markers converge, and consolidation is already underway before steel meets wood. Ships align within the narrow corridor, transforming the fjord into a controlled space designed for decisive elimination rather than chaos. Preparation unfolds methodically, shields secured, lashings tightened, movements coordinated like scheduled labor rather than spontaneous fury. Authority endures through minimal signals. A single gesture synchronizes crews, revealing how hierarchy scales without spectacle. Rival power disappears symbolically. A family token splits apart, and political identity dissolves into residue. On the map, opposing markers fade, leaving a single anchored block positioned at strategic chokepoints. Defeat translates into logistics as households load boats, turning political loss into organized migration. Exile spreads because remaining within the emerging order offers no viable future for displaced elites. A thin maritime line extends toward Iceland, converting opposition into geographic distance. Harsh coastlines become the price of autonomy, where safety exists only through environmental austerity. Consolidation logic repeats in Denmark, tightening territories around a center without reliance on legend. A power site rises at Jelling, and surrounding land begins to orbit construction, supervision, and permanence. Monumental stone functions as infrastructure, fixing authority in durable material and projecting continuity across generations. Symbols advance because administration requires a single focal point capable of organizing loyalty and obligation. Denmark settles into a legible block where internal autonomy recedes into a simplified, governable structure. Embarkation becomes orderly and scheduled, bundles are counted, and force transforms into a repeatable system of deployment. A corridor links Denmark and England, establishing extraction as a recurring cycle rather than a singular event. English defenses solidify into infrastructure, quietly increasing the cost of entry through walls and watch platforms. Payment routines emerge through scales and seals, converting coercion into standardized exchange. England functions less as conquest and more as revenue stream, structured through payments that can be measured and repeated. Revenue nodes replace battlefields on the map, and collection evolves into a coordinated network. Notched boards and categorized tallies introduce standardization, making tribute predictable across distance. Counting rooms multiply alongside income, allowing administration to expand in tandem with cash flow. Diplomatic symbols sit beside payment pouches, linking religious legitimacy with extraction practices. Norway and Denmark darken as consolidated centers, while England threads into a functioning revenue grid. Sealed sacks move methodically to ships, embedding extraction within a disciplined logistical chain.
Professional administrators emerge from former warbands, redefining identity around management rather than plunder. The shoreline quiets after departure, leaving absence where spectacle once stood. Collection corridors simplify governance, reducing complex territories into transportable procedures. At the core, the crown rests beside sealed revenue, signaling that authority now derives from controlled flow rather than heroic memory.
Trade routes narrow into chokepoints, concentrating control wherever movement is forced through confined geography. A fjord gate requires little spectacle. A rope barrier quietly transforms open passage into regulated permission and measurable income. Standardized bundles and calibrated weights make tribute predictable, converting coercion into a disciplined accounting routine. Raiding declines not from restraint, but from efficiency. Structured corridors outperform randomness in sustaining power. Surplus becomes engineered rather than seized, as reorganized fields and counted sacks render production visible to authority. Control shifts toward access management. Keys and seals regulate action more effectively than speeches or symbolic gestures. Trade hubs such as Birka and Hedeby anchor the system, where density enables monitoring, coordination, and fee collection. Markets generate their own control points, since goods must pass through narrow lanes where inspection and taxation become routine. Law stabilizes elite relations by channeling private vengeance into procedures that protect hierarchy from internal fracture. Assemblies persist in form, yet clerks and guards shape outcomes quietly, narrowing the range of meaningful dissent. Christianity integrates into administration, carrying recognition across borders and reinforcing compliance through shared frameworks. Religious nodes align with trade corridors, strengthening the same networks that transmit tribute and centralized authority. Governance becomes portable. A chest of weights, seals, and records carries state capacity wherever extraction is required. The crown rests beside ledgers and sacks, symbolizing rule as management of flow rather than celebration of conquest. Stability appears durable, yet centralized revenue concentrates risk, leaving silence in the fjord as both proof of control and reminder of fragility.
The thing continues to assemble, yet guards and clerks now frame the circle, converting open participation into supervised procedure. Law no longer rests on spoken authority alone. Seals and formal authentication bind judgment directly to enforcement. Fixed nodes begin to anchor the corridors, and governance shifts from local memory to an interconnected administrative web. Churches operate as offices within this structure. Sealed bundles arrive, and legitimacy is processed with quiet efficiency. Literacy reshapes authority, as wax, signet rings, and folded parchment render power portable and difficult to dispute. Archives extend rule beyond individual lifetimes, externalizing memory so that institutions outlast households. Trade centers such as Birka and Hedeby intensify as focal points, where density allows oversight and fee collection to function smoothly. Urban lanes narrow into built-in checkpoints, embedding regulation within architecture rather than announcing it as doctrine. Measurement systems standardize obligation. Weights and stamped tags make extraction consistent across strangers and distance. Royal and clerical agents share tables because their cooperation reinforces hierarchy, aligning spiritual recognition with fiscal control. Scandinavian hubs orient southward, linking into continental frameworks of exchange and layered obligation. Disputes travel upward through the hierarchy as local elders surrender tokens and autonomy narrows at guarded thresholds.
Codified law consolidates elite security by replacing private vengeance with controlled adjudication that protects the center. Administrative procedure materializes as queues and counters, turning justice and commerce into regulated bottlenecks. Order becomes mechanical and impersonal. Smoke rises evenly over a settlement sustained by routine rather than kinship.
The map settles into solid blocks. Former clan boundaries recede, and stability appears as simplified structure rather than shared harmony. Ships remain in service, not for spectacle, but because maritime capacity has become infrastructure for surveillance and steady revenue. Taxation logic now defines the core. Weights, seals, and repetitive procedures replace raids with predictable extraction. Collection moves inside the household. Measured goods are surrendered, and compliance becomes an ordinary condition of survival. Clan symbols drift out of relevance while seal cords tighten, marking the quiet erosion of inherited autonomy. Scandinavian centers orient southward, exchanging degrees of independence for access to broader European networks. Diplomacy turns procedural as envoys trade sealed documents and recognition travels through institutions rather than kinship. Authority rests increasingly on access control, keys, lockboxes, and authenticated faith reinforcing centralized oversight. Order becomes procedural, routine displaces feud, and daily life reorganizes itself around supervision. Grievances shift into petitions, and justice narrows into a channel managed by appointed officials. Power concentrates at a central node, creating efficiency while exposing the system to singular points of failure. Fragility hides within repetition. A cracked seal must be replaced, and legitimacy requires constant renewal. Earlier patterns do not vanish entirely. They persist beneath the surface, capable of resurfacing under strain. The horizon remains empty and impersonal, reminding that individuals fade while structures endure until pressure builds again. The clan token disappears from the table. The crown and ledger remain, leaving the final question unresolved: strength gained or vulnerability rearranged?